John Miller wiped the sweat from his forehead as he leaned against his rusty old tractor. His farm, which had been in his family for generations, was struggling. The crops weren't growing well, and the bank kept sending warning letters about his overdue loan. If things didn't get better soon, he might lose everything. One evening, as John sat on his porch, sipping a cup of coffee, he noticed an old van pulling up his driveway. 2 men and a woman stepped out, looking tired and hungry. "Excuse me, sir," one of the men said. "We're travelers. We don't have a place to stay for the night. Would you mind if we camp on your land?" John hesitated. He didn't trust strangers easily, but they looked harmless. And besides, he knew what it was like to struggle. "All right," he said. "You can stay, but no trouble, understand?" The 3 strangers nodded gratefully. John had no idea that letting them stay would change his life forever. The next morning, John walked over to check on the visitors. The woman, who introduced herself as Emily, was making coffee over a small fire. The other 2 men, Greg and Sam, were setting up a tent. "We'll be gone soon, sir," Greg said. "Just need a little rest." John nodded. "You need food?" he asked. The travelers exchanged glances before nodding. "If you have some to spare, we'd be grateful." John went back to his house and packed some bread, cheese, and apples. He didn't have much, but he shared what he could. As the strangers ate, John sat with them and listened to their stories. They said they were just passing through, looking for work and a fresh start. They seemed friendly, but something about them felt off. They never mentioned their past, and when John asked where they were from, they avoided the question. Still, they were polite and hard-working, so John decided not to worry too much. That was until something strange happened the next night. John was sleeping when he heard whispering outside his window. He quietly got up and peeked through the curtain. The 3 strangers were huddled near their van, talking in hushed voices. One of them kept looking around as if checking to see if anyone was watching. John's stomach tightened. What were they hiding? He stepped outside and cleared his throat. The strangers jumped. "Everything all right?" John asked. Greg forced a smile. "Yeah, just talking," he said quickly. But John wasn't convinced. The way they acted made him uneasy. "Look, I don't want trouble," John said. "If you're hiding something, you need to tell me now." Emily shook her head. "We're just tired, sir. Please let us stay a little longer," she pleaded. John sighed. He still had his doubts, but he decided to let them stay one more night. The next morning, he would ask them to leave. At sunrise, John was getting ready to tell the strangers to pack up when he heard something unusual, a convoy of black SUVs speeding down his dusty road. The vehicles skidded to a stop in front of his house. Men in suits and bulletproof vests jumped out, their faces serious. One of them held up a badge. "FBI," he said. "Where are they?" John's heart pounded. "Who?" he asked, pretending not to know what they meant. The agent's eyes narrowed. "The 3 people staying on your land, they're dangerous, and we need to find them now." John turned his head toward the strangers' campsite, but they were gone. The van was still there, but Emily, Greg, and Sam had disappeared. "They were just here last night," John said, his voice shaky. The agent cursed under his breath. "We need to search your property. Now." John, still in shock, stepped aside. What had he gotten himself into? The FBI agents spread out, searching John's farm. They checked the barn, the fields, even inside his house. Meanwhile, John stood on his porch trying to make sense of everything. "Who are they?" he finally asked. The lead agent, a man named Agent Carter, looked at him. "They're fugitives, wanted for robbery and possible murder. You were harboring criminals, Mr. Miller." John's mouth went dry. "I didn't know." he said quickly. They told me they were just travelers. Agent Carter nodded. We believe they've been moving from town to town, staying under the radar. They must have slipped away when they saw us coming. John shook his head in disbelief. He had let criminals stay on his land. Had he put himself in danger without realizing it? Just then, one of the agents shouted, "We found something!" Everyone rushed to the barn. Inside, hidden under hay bales, was a metal box. When the agent opened it, John's breath caught in his throat. The box was filled with stacks of cash. Agent Carter whistled. Well, looks like they left something behind. John stared at the money, feeling his knees go weak. Is that stolen? He asked. Carter nodded. Most likely. We'll have to run the serial numbers, but if I had to guess, this is from one of their robberies. John felt sick. Had they hidden it here on purpose? Or had they forgotten it in their rush to escape? Just then, an agent's radio crackled. We have movement near the woods. Possible suspects fleeing on foot. Carter grabbed his radio. Surround the area. They can't get far. John watched as the agents ran toward the trees. His farm, his peaceful life, had suddenly turned into a crime scene. He had wanted to help people, but now he was tangled in something far bigger than he ever imagined. As the FBI disappeared into the woods, John stood there wondering what would happen next. John stood frozen as the FBI agents disappeared into the woods. His heart pounded as he imagined what might happen next. Would the fugitives escape? Would there be a shootout? He had no idea, but one thing was certain. His life had changed forever. Minutes later, gunshots echoed through the trees. Hold your fire! Agent Carter's voice boomed over the radio. John held his breath, watching as the FBI moved swiftly. Suddenly, two of the agents emerged, dragging Greg and Sam in handcuffs. Their faces were scratched from the branches, and they looked exhausted, but Emily was nowhere to be seen. Where's the woman? Carter demanded. One of the agents shook his head. She got away. John swallowed hard. Emily was still out there, and something told him she wasn't done yet. That night, John couldn't sleep. He kept replaying everything in his head. He had been so close to real danger without even realizing it. Just as he was about to close his eyes, he heard a noise outside his window. His stomach dropped. Slowly, he grabbed his shotgun and tiptoed to the door. When he opened it, he was shocked. Standing there, shivering in the moonlight, was Emily. Her eyes were desperate. Please, she whispered. I need your help. John gripped his gun tightly. You lied to me, he said. Emily nodded. I know, but I had no choice. Greg and Sam were dangerous. I wanted out, but they wouldn't let me. John hesitated. If she was telling the truth, was she really a criminal, or was she just trapped in a bad situation? Either way, helping her would put him in even more trouble. John knew he had two choices: turn Emily in or believe her and let her go. He took a deep breath. Why should I trust you? He asked. Emily looked down. Because I didn't steal the money. Greg and Sam did. I was just caught in the middle. Her voice cracked. I never wanted any of this. I just want to disappear. John sighed. His gut told him she was telling the truth, but trusting her could cost him everything. He made his decision. Go, he whispered. But if the FBI finds out I helped you, I'm done for. Emily nodded, her eyes full of gratitude. You won't regret this, she said, before vanishing into the darkness. John closed the door, his hands shaking. He had just helped a fugitive escape. What had he done? The next morning, the FBI returned to John's farm. Agent Carter looked frustrated. We caught the men, but the woman is still out there, he said. If she comes back, you tell us immediately. John nodded, keeping his face neutral. Of course, he lied. Days passed, but Emily never returned. John kept wondering if he had done the right thing. Then, one afternoon, he found something unexpected in his mailbox, an envelope with no return address. Inside was a small note. "Thank you. Here's something to help you." Along with it were several $1,000s in cash. John's breath caught in his throat. Had Emily sent this? Was this stolen money? He felt torn. He needed the money desperately, but keeping it might make him no better than the criminals. John stared at the money, debating what to do. It could save his farm. It could pay his debts. But at what cost? Finally, he made up his mind. He took the envelope and drove straight to town, walking into the sheriff's office. "I think this belongs to the FBI," he said, handing it over. Agent Carter was surprised. "Where did you get this?" he asked. John shrugged. "It was in my mailbox. I don't know who sent it." Carter studied him for a moment, then sighed. "You're an honest man, John. Most people wouldn't have done this." John felt a weight lift off his shoulders. Maybe his farm would still struggle, but at least he had done the right thing. Weeks passed, and life slowly returned to normal. Greg and Sam had been sent to prison, and Emily was still missing. The FBI had stopped coming around, and John focused on his farm, even though he still faced financial trouble. Then, one morning, a black SUV pulled up to his house. John tensed, expecting more bad news, but when Agent Carter stepped out, he was smiling. "John, I have something for you," he said. He handed John a letter. Inside was a check for $50,000. "What is this?" John asked, shocked. Carter chuckled. "The government has a reward for helping capture fugitives, and since you did the right thing with the money, you deserve this." John couldn't believe it. His farm was saved. He had done the right thing, and in the end, honesty had paid off. As the agent drove away, John stood there, smiling for the first time in a long time.